Hey guys, this is episode 43 and a half of Two Jersey Kids. It's a little bit of a shake-up here. It's just me here in, my little apartment. Gary's not here right now due to scheduling issues and everything, but I figured there had to be, the show must go on, so I put together the audio from my interview that I did with the Philadelphia Sports Table podcast that I did about the evolution of sports and video games, and I'm thankful that they had me over there. So I think you'll enjoy this interview. I touched on a lot of things, whether it's I went through the briefly went over the history of the evolution of sports and video games. I also touched in sports with VR and esports, and also whether or not video games are now becoming a detriment to children in society. So I think it's a very informative discussion that I had with Jeff Warren over at that podcast. So I think you'll all enjoy it. So enjoy.
All right, and it is such a pleasure to have on the line with us for the very first time, not just here on Table Talk, but here at the Philadelphia Sports Table podcast show, one of our longtime followers, and we've been going back and forth with him now for a couple years. He has his own podcast show with a buddy of his called Two Jersey Kids, where they talk about video games, the industry. My buddy, Adam Buckingham. Adam, how are you, man? Thanks for coming on.
I'm good. Thanks for having me. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I am doing great. And, we haven't dove into a conversation like you and I are going to have specifically about sports video games, the industry, the history, the evolution of sports video games in our society and in our culture. But before we actually get to the crux of everything, I wanted our listeners to know that they should really follow you on Twitter at Adam J. Buckingham, and also head on over to Two Jersey Kids. I should say at Two Jersey Kids to listen to that particular podcast show. Every episode that you guys do, I think, comes out on Tuesdays and Fridays, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Tuesdays are shorter ones, kind of like what you do with the Table Talk. We just discuss like one topic, me and Gary, or bring somebody on like you're doing now with me. And then Friday we go through all the news that's been going on, which is normally a plethora. And last week was E3, so we had 3 episodes going on. So
nice.
If you're into video games in the Philadelphia area, come check us out.
All right, yes, Two Jersey Kids, check them out. Adam, with your podcast and what you guys have been doing at Two Jersey Kids, you talk about video games in general. I've listened to your show before. I mean, how long have you been recording and uploading the Two Kids Jersey podcast? And, what kind of made you want to concentrate on talking about video games? And one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you this, too, is because all of us in podcasting, we're very passionate about what we are talking about on a weekly basis. So what made you want to concentrate on talking specifically about video games?
Well, it's actually kind of I don't know, a funny story, but it's a story nonetheless. But I've always wanted to do a podcast, whether it's about, because I have passions in a lot of things. I like video games, always loved them since I was a younger kid. I'm into science as well, so I try to do, at a certain point, I try to start off my own science podcast, but being by yourself, it is really difficult.
It is tough.
The spotlight is all on you,
Yep.
so I kind of struggled through that, so I never really quite hit it off then. And I also wanted to do Philly sports podcast, so I was sort of juggling it up in the air, and I've always contacted Gary constantly. I was like, I want to do this podcast, and I feel like we would be really good at it, the dynamic between the two, because he's more of the calm, cool, collected, says things that are, just straightforward, and I'm more of just the rambling, like, bumbling idiot on the show.
I love how you have your own roles on the show, kind of like Len and I do, and it was
Exactly.
really just organic. I mean, I'm the guy who's always talking from his heart, like you. I kind of tend to ramble on. Len is just very logical. He's a straight shooter. People like him in terms of that personality, and I don't know if people like my personality. They usually tend to hate it, and my laugh, unfortunately, if you ever heard that episode. But anyway, I completely get it, and I think that's one of the special things about podcasts, and especially, like you said, having just yourself do it. It is a tough thing to do. For people out there who are simply doing a podcast, I shouldn't say simply, doing a podcast by themselves, it's not simple at all. I mean, having to do an Eagles postgame show by myself like I've done before, oh my God, it's stress-inducing, Adam.
I've done plenty more by myself on Two Jersey Kids. I've done a solo episode by myself.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that with the science episode or science podcast that I tried to start up by myself, it seems like I put too much thought in because I was worried about saying the right thing, making sure the facts are straight.
Yeah.
Whereas video games, played them all my life. It's something I can shoot from the heart, where it's just something you kind of can feel your way through, talk through the articles, and just give your opinions, where science is more facts. So I never wanted to screw that up, where now video games I can sort of ramble on more and still feel like I'm saying a consistent message.
Yeah, I got you. And since we're a sports podcast show here, of course, I wanted to bring you on to dive into sports video games with you. Adam, I remember my first sports video game growing up. It was Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for Nintendo.
Solid.
Oh, yeah. And after that, I remember playing Blades of Steel, such a great hockey game. And then, of course, Tecmo Bowl I had as well. It was like it was having that arcade right in your own home, right in your living room. So if we can kind of get into it a little bit, just because you are a video game guy, can you discuss kind of the evolving culture that's surrounded sports video games maybe over the past 50 years or so?
Yeah, sure. I actually looked this up because I wasn't quite sure, because I am a young guy. I'm only 23, if you didn't know out there. So, I haven't been actually around when the Punch-Outs and the Tecmo Bowl was out. Sorry to make you feel old, Jeff. But
everybody makes me feel old.
But I did some research. Actually, the first technically sports in video games, I know a lot of people go right to Pong, but back in 1958, there was a thing called Tennis for Two,
yes,
which apparently a physicist by the name of William Higginbotham. I suck at names. If you listen to the podcast, you'll understand.
Again, that's my role too. Yep, go ahead.
He created on an oscilloscope, which measures voltage if you are a science person. So he just did that because sometimes he wanted to keep people entertained while they're visiting him at his laboratory, which is kind of cool. And then in 1969, Sega introduced an arcade game known as Grand Prix, which is kind of like the introduction of the steering wheel you see nowadays with the racing games in arcades. Very interesting. And then 1972 is when Pong came out, and that was a huge thing. That was what started off this whole video game industry. And then going from 1973 to 1979, it seemed like everybody was copying Pong different multiplayer platforms. Like they did soccer, the first two hockey games basically were Pong. So they were all very simple, I guess you could say, games that were just called a certain sports title, like basketball, boxing, bowling, hockey, And then 1980 to 85 is when the console wars begun. So it seemed like every sports game under the sun started to pop up on these consoles, the Sega and the NES. For example, horse racing, bullfighting, and rock climbing, an example, which is kind of strange. And then 1982 was kind of a big thing now with video games, is that pole position was developed and created by Namco, and it was the first introduction of AI. 1979 or 1989, the expanded use of AI, which was EA's, first dive into sports, which now they are the monopoly, the monstrosity that is EA that everyone hates on in the video game industry. So they created the Earl Weaver baseball. No other sports game was anywhere close to like the realism you see in this game prior. And some people still consider that to be the greatest game of all time. Then 1988 and through 1995, that's the improved graphics with Madden. And then you see the release of all the Maddens. And then 1989, Tecmo Bowl, like you stated, came out for the NES. The 16-bit took off. Then you have 16-bit era took off. Sorry, apologize. And in 1997 to 2004, a lot of people, even me included, it was kind of the golden age of sports games, because there's a lot of different. It's where it entered the 3D space, I guess you could say. So you have all the Tony Hawk franchises, which is kind of where skateboarding took off, is because of Tony Hawk and the zeitgeist behind skateboarding and how fun those games were. Yep. You can consider that a sport or not a sport. Then you have all the Madden games that were released over and over and over again. So there was a lot of competition in the sports industry. And then 2004, unfortunately, it seemed like EA and 2K sort of took over the industry, where EA specifically got rights to release only rights to the NFL product to only release Madden. So you saw the ESPN 2K games fall by the wayside, and now Madden has the monopoly on that. Luckily enough, 2K did get a third-party deal, so they were able to release for NBA games, so or baseball, so you don't have that monopoly, right, so to speak. And now, really, it's just
it's crazy. Now it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's just more better graphics, new roster updates. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of innovation. But yeah, a big thing is just,
Well, I think
we'll get to it later on, but esports is like another avenue nowadays.
Exactly.
In video games and sports. Sorry. Hopefully I said that conducive enough for people listening. I wasn't rambling or, Yeah,
no, I mean, it was a good timeline for us, to really realize when sports video games in particular, really came about. And I think what's really interesting, Adam, is the technology. I mean, you're not going to have the rapid advance of sports video games in our culture, in our society, if you don't have the rapid advance of technology. And, whether it's having personal computers in our homes and the size of those personal computers and how all of it kind of relates to each other in the end, I think that's, from a cultural standpoint, what we've seen. Progress on the technology front that enables sports video games to have gotten to where they are today. You would agree with that, probably, right?
Completely.
Yeah. So now, listen, do you think video game consoles, I guess, have had a major impact on how we play sports video games? Because I remember when Nintendo was basically almost dead, and then all of a sudden the Wii came along and basically integrated exercise with gaming components. It kind of helped transform the industry in a lot of ways, going back again to the technology and just taking and enhancing and just incorporating certain technological components of what the hardware was to how we live our daily lives, and how that helped revolutionize, I should say, the sports video gaming industry. So, I mean, how do you think that the evolution of the actual consoles over the years have actually helped with the evolution of sports video games?
I think the evolution definitely has helped. The processing power, allowing to do a lot more things in sports games, and now they have a lot of simulation aspects. If you want to take a franchise, be your own player, a lot of the technology has definitely been conducive enough. Because I remember when I was younger, they didn't quite have everything you wanted out of a franchise mode. So you sort of sometimes could simulate your own games, make your own franchises. Now it's sort of inbred in the game itself. Yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned Wii. Their new console, the Switch, is now sort of a hybrid, so it's kind of gone back to the button controls. But the motion controls are still there. They have these detachable controllers on the side of the Switch now, which you use to play this game called ARMS, which is just like an expansion on Wii Boxing, which was the craze is Wii Sports back when the Wii was released. That sort of connected with the casual gamer. So you're able to play a more updated Wii Boxing, which is a lot more fun than just straight up boxing. There's a lot of different things you can do in that game where it's just not boxing. It's kind of funny, though, is that it seems like the Wii and their motion controls was kind of the outlier. That's where they connected with the casual fan, because you see with the PlayStation, PlayStation Xbox tried to adopt that with the PlayStation Move, which was basically kind of the same thing as the Wii controllers and the Microsoft Kinect. However, those two didn't really connect. They didn't really have the same zeitgeist as the Wii did. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's just the Wii just hit that market with the Wii Sports and everyone could connect with doing Wii bowling or baseball. However, the large thing that I feel like you could see in the future is now VR is a huge component of video games nowadays. It's starting to make its tick upwards. And I could definitely see now. Can you talk about
VR for a little bit and what it stands for, what it actually means?
Oh, sorry. VR is actually virtual reality. So you have PlayStation VR. You have Oculus, which was launched a huge Kickstarter way back when Facebook bought them out. And then you have HTC Vive, which is there are three different VR consoles. The PSVR is more the lower end of cost wise, and then you work your way up. And you have to buy a beefy computer to run the other two. Yep. But yeah, it's basically you put a headset on. You can use motion controllers, or you can use a controller itself. But I can see how if they start, it's in its baby state with VR. Yeah. But I can definitely see down the road you could be playing as a football player, quarterback in the back throwing. Oh my gosh! Yeah, I could definitely see that because they're making strides nowadays, and I 100% could see that EA would try to, work its way into VR when it becomes a larger and larger thing, which it's going to be a slow process right now because there's such a new technology that developers are experimenting with and testing out what works best, what doesn't give people motion sickness, which can happen in those type of games. Oh, yeah. So it's kind of a give and take.
Yeah, and I guess where I kind of want to go next with you, Adam, is from the cultural standpoint and what video games have meant to, kids kids, teenagers, even, individuals like yourself who are in your 20s or 30s or 40s even. And I'm wondering if you think sports video games and even video games in general are kind of detrimental to the well-being, of our youth, and with just keeping people inside all the time. A lot of people, they aren't getting the physical activity that they need to stay healthy in this day and age. And certain studies have come about saying that it's specifically from a youth perspective because of the video game world, because of iPads and iPhones. Or do you think that they can actually be helpful developmentally? I'm talking about video games and sports video games, maybe with hand-to-eye coordination. Mm-hmm. Because I can see both sides of the coin on this, Adam. What are your thoughts from a cultural standpoint, detrimental, non-detrimental in terms of sports video games?
It's funny enough. I brought someone on to my podcast, Two Jersey Kids, and Ivan Kaltman, who is very knowledgeable on video games and education purposes. So we ran through all the, different stereotypes that is video games and how there's a stigma that goes with video games. And the funny thing I have is, I was thinking about this question over and over. You see nowadays, the kids are playing these video games for a long while. But, you're going into a workplace now. If you don't mind me asking, do you work at a seated desk for 8 to 10 hours a day?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's, at times, yeah. It depends, yeah. Working in the sphere that I work in, sometimes I'm on the road with meetings. But, yeah, it would be a desk job, and I have. Ever since I graduated college, it's been that type of thing, a desk job, basically 8 hours a day.
But I guess what people are having against these video games is they expect their kids to go out and run and play and do all the jazz, do all the fun things that kids are supposed to do, while when you finally become an adult, that's when you sit at a desk. And I think
Right.
So I personally was one of the kids that would play hours upon hours of games when I would get home from school if I wasn't over my friend's house. So I did go through that phase where my metabolism didn't quite keep up with my body. Right. So I did become a bit chubby, but I did thinned out when
life.
But that's when I did thin out in middle school. But I do get frustrated because people always want to blame one thing, whether it's video games or anything else, for their child not running around constantly. And when it comes to the healthiness of the child, I feel like that should be more put onto the parents. I don't want to, insult parents out there. I'm not saying it's all to blame. But, there are options where if they are sitting in front of a TV screen, you could offer them, because a lot of the issues with chubbiness and eating too much is the snacking that involves when you're doing anything and you're not paying attention, whether you're reading or watching a movie. If you're snacking on a bunch of potato chips over a course of 10 hours, then I can see how that could be unhealthy for the child. Yeah. But if you're offering healthy alternatives, I remember playing in my basement, playing, classic games like Halo and stuff like that. My grandma would come out and serve me apples with peanut butter. A lot healthier than, snacking on, Cheetos or potato chips. Yeah. And I just think, I don't know, it just feels like there's always a negative stigma. And I know personally as a child that I loved trying to explain to my parents why I love video games. I would like when they would come to ask me. So I'm not a parent in any way, so I'm not saying that I know what is involved. But if you do want to understand, I feel like this is a good way to understand your child more. You go talk to them, ask them, why do they love this video game? Why do they enjoy playing this? Me personally, I loved online shooters. So you could tell right then I was a competitive person. That's why I also enjoyed playing sports, because I like to compete on the field every day. So lucky enough, I got my exercise that way. But you can also, nowadays, a lot of kids are into Minecraft. If you don't know what Minecraft is, it's kind of just a creative game world, virtual world, where the world is just a bunch of blocks, and a lot of kids go in and just create new things and expand their creative mind, which I think is fantastic. But as a parent, like, this is an example, you can go talk to them, ask them why are they into Minecraft? Why do they like doing this? And don't pay attention to what they're talking about. Pay attention to realize that they are into the creative aspect of Minecraft. They like building things, and then maybe sort of work your way around to figure out how the way to get them out of the house and do creative things like that. Like build a tree house, build a fence, build something with them. You can activate a child's mind outside by learning new things, what they like in the virtual world where anything is really possible, what they can create.
Exactly.
And you can try to, tailor to what you want them to do. It's kind of the opposite way. Why is it okay for you to bring your child to sit, if you want your child to sit with you as a parent watching any sports game, any football, baseball, basketball, you want to tell them why you love it, and hopefully they'll reciprocate it. They'll reciprocate why you find a passion watching the Phillies, Eagles, Sixers, Flyers, Philadelphia Union, the new Philadelphia Esports team. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I mean, why can't you reciprocate that to your kid and give them the same courtesy?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Adam, is one word, and it's called balance. I think that's what you're talking about here throughout your entire answer there. And I think that's very important. I think there is a place for kids to be able to enjoy this type of medium, but also to have other life experiences too. Like you said,
Exactly.
it doesn't just have to be sitting down all the time. It doesn't have to be outside all the time. There is a balance that can come with this.
Exactly.
But moving along though, I think what's interesting about many new sports video games is the fact that there are now storylines that are being intertwined in the games. I mean, we know, listen, I've been a big Call of Duty fan for a very long period of time. Yes, out there, I do play video games with some buddies of mine, and but we have those storylines in those type of games, but it really seems that from sports video game perspective that we're seeing more of these storylines. Developers, I mean, they want their users to feel as though they're actually in the game and the story itself. And I know with Madden 18 coming out, it's going to be embarking on this as well. And they're calling their storyline, and it's basically the first storyline in the Madden history, from what I understand. It's going to be called The Long Shot. The idea is that you are playing the part of a quarterback who's basically a forgotten college star trying to mount a comeback and make it in the NFL. And as you progress, you interact with other characters and personalities like Dan Marino and other NFL greats. So it's very interesting. So in the game, your decision and your performances in the practices and all that stuff affect how your player develops. I mean, what are your thoughts on this type of development in the sports video game world, Adam? Are we kind of getting to that next level? Is it too ridiculous, or does it really kind of just bring you in and make you want to be a part of that game even more?
Funny enough, that storyline talking about Madden and The Long Shot kind of reminded me of the movie The Replacements with Shane Falco, the forgotten college star.
Yep.
Funny enough, that was a joy of a movie.
Yes, it was.
But yeah, I mean, this is an interesting development. Apparently, FIFA 17 had that type of story mode. FIFA soccer. Some people like it, some people don't.
Yep.
A lot of people love it in college. It's a University of Maryland that I went to. But apparently people adored that. However, on the flip side, NBA 2K16 did have a story mode, and it was written by Spike Lee, which I personally wasn't a fan of because it just didn't feel like your character that you created is going through these cutscenes, but they're talking that their voice doesn't sound anything like you. It kind of takes you out of it. The voice doesn't match up with the size of the character that you have. Like if you have a 5'8" short dude, the voice is very deep. And I'm like, I don't think that really matches up.
Right.
Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of this development with the storyline because I kind of created my story myself is when I created in MLB The Show, which is a baseball game for PlayStation, is The Road to the Show. I created my own story of being like a closer pitcher or a third baseman and whether or not I was having a good or a bad night. I mean, that was the story. The story can develop in-game as if just how your character is performing. So I don't know if I need the extra, incentive in between games of, random drama that is happening off the field. I personally don't, but some people I can understand how they would be into that.
Yeah, okay. Well, last question for you before I let you go. And again, everybody, feel free to follow our good friend Adam Buckingham on Twitter, at Adam J. Buckingham, and also follow Two Jersey Kids on Twitter, at Two Jersey Kids. Listen to their podcast show on a weekly basis every Tuesday and Friday.
Do it.
Yeah, I know it's a general question here. This last one for you, Adam. What are your thoughts, basically, just on the future of sports video games? I know we talked about VR, virtual reality earlier on, but where do you think we're heading over these next 20 or I'd say 10 to 20 years or so?
I mean, now the huge thing that is in video games is esports, which is considered, some people consider sports themselves, electronic sports. You can consider it a sport or not, but it is like exploding with everything. Right now, it's projected to, revenue of $1.5 billion by 2020. The NBA is actually hopping into the esports arena, which I mentioned to you on Twitter way back when, which has sort of started the steamroll of me being on your podcast.
Yep.
If you didn't know, the NBA is actually sponsoring this esports league. It's going to be made up of, I think, 17 teams. They'll have like a months-long season ending in a playoff, just like the normal NBA, drafting different esports players that are good at the NBA 2K game, a team of 5, and they'll play together. But yeah, I see how esports actually can be kind of a new thing, and the benefit with esports I'm seeing nowadays is that there's plenty of avenues for esports, because all games change. All games shift over time. Counter-Strike was a huge game way back when. It still is nowadays, but you're seeing Call of Duty starting to creep in on the first-person shooter aspect. Real-time strategy game StarCraft was a huge esports game, and then now it's shifting over to MOBAs. That's the benefit of esports, is that you can develop new games that sort of hop in now into the esports area. For example, Rocket League is a huge game. It's basically you're playing soccer with cars. Fantastic game. But yeah, 37% of the revenue comes from North America and 41% from China for esports, and about 162 million people are esports enthusiasts, so they watch it religiously. Yeah. And then 161 million are just casual viewers. So occasionally, like me, I watch it from time to time. I watch, card playing games. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can go down. There's fighting games, there's card games, there's strategy games. So that is the benefit. That's what I see esports in the future. Whether it's sports games in general, I feel like they'll maybe, once VR becomes a huge thing, I feel like they'll start hitting in that area. And I'm honestly, personally, I don't know how much they can innovate now with the certain consoles. They can just update the roster, make it look cooler, add tweaks and, things here and there. But I haven't seen, as you touched on earlier in the podcast, I haven't seen too much of a leap per se in these video games. So it'll be interesting going forward. It's going to be fun.
He's Adam Buckingham from the Two Jersey Kids podcast. Adam, it was great having you on this week on our Table Talk show. And hey, listen, maybe down the road have you on again to talk about some more of the evolution of this sports video gaming world. But you guys keep up the great work that you are doing, and hope to have you on down the road.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Always great interviews here at the Philadelphia Sports Table Podcast Show. This week, no different with Adam Buckingham. That's going to do it for us, folks. Catch us on social media. We're on Twitter at Philadelphia PST. We're on Instagram. Search us out, Philadelphia Sports Table. And of course, we are on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Philadelphia Sports Table. We'd like to hear from you over email. Email us a question, concern, a topic you want us to get into. PhiladelphiaSportsTable@gmail.com. And you can also leave us a voicemail message. We'd love to hear from you and play your message on our regular show, 610-255-7198. Again, 610-255-7198. Again, remember our Flyers t-shirt giveaway that we are doing this week. Head over to iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Google Play Music. Rate us, review us, and you'll have the opportunity, simply by rating and reviewing us, to win an extra-large Philadelphia Flyers t-shirt. It's a great-looking t-shirt, and it's going to wrap it up here for me. So you all take care, and we'll catch you next time.